Masai Mara eastern boundary, late afternoon. Rainwater poured off the edge of the cracked tarmac, carrying silt and leaves into a shallow roadside trench. The downpour had eased to a steady mist, but the ground remained slick, and the red clay clung to boots like glue. Along a narrow service road used by wildlife patrol units, a white Land Cruiser slowed to a crawl. Officer Kamari leaned forward, squinting through the streaked windshield. A sound had cut through the hum of the engine. Not a bird call, not wind. A cry, short, repeating. He stopped the vehicle and stepped out. Just ahead, where the drain curved behind a cluster of low shrubs, a shape pressed low into the mud. At first, Kamari thought it was a carcass. Wet fur matted to bone, ribs too visible. But the sound came again, faint and hoarse, and this time it moved. A paw twitched, and a small head lifted an inch before collapsing again. The cub lay in a depression where rainwater had pooled. No more than 4 or 5 weeks old, its coat was thin and patchy from malnutrition. Its tail dragged through the water, limp. The belly barely rose with breath. When Kamari stepped closer, the cub did not flinch. It didn't even look up. Only the sound came again, a strained, broken cry, barely more than a whisper. Its muzzle quivered. The eyes were open, glassy, but unfocused. Kamari crouched beside the ditch, careful not to touch it. He scanned the surrounding area. No tracks, no adult calls, no recent movement. There was no sign of a lioness nearby, no prints leading into the grass, only the deep, washed-out trails of runoff. The cub was alone, severely underweight, and barely conscious. If left here, it wouldn't survive the night. He opened his jacket slowly and lowered himself further. The cub didn't resist as he reached underneath its chest. The ribs shifted under his hands, too sharp, too still. Lifting it felt like lifting waterlogged cloth. It hung in his arms, silent now, too exhausted to cry again. He stood and wrapped the fabric around the cub's body, tucking it against his chest. Its fur was cold, soaked straight through to the skin. Kamari murmured one line under his breath. "Stay with me." Back at the vehicle, he laid the cub on a folded blanket on the passenger seat and turned up the heat. The radio crackled faintly, but he didn't call in yet. The risk was immediate. If the cub's temperature didn't stabilize in the next hour, if its lungs had begun to fill, if it hadn't fed in days, all were likely, the drive alone could be too much. The cub blinked once, a slow, lopsided movement, and then closed its eyes. Kamari placed one hand gently over its side. The heartbeat was faint. There. But there. Every minute it survived mattered. Every breath it took now was a battle against weakness. The odds were not in its favor. The rain thickened again as they pulled away, tires slipping slightly in the mud. Behind them, the ditch filled quietly, swallowing the space where the cub had cried. In the front seat, wrapped in an old ranger coat, it made no sound. But its chest still rose. Slow, uneven, and alive. The wind picked up again as Kamari pulled the Land Cruiser off the raised service path, tires slipping through shallow puddles and patches of soft red earth. The cub hadn't stirred in minutes. Its chest still rose, but slower now, less certain. Rain struck the windshield in long diagonal streaks, thick enough to blur the edge of the grassland. The Mara boundary stretched behind him, empty and fading. No sign of tracks, no calls from a lioness, no movement in the bush. Kamari turned off the engine and sat still, the soft tick of cooling metal filling the silence. The interior had grown cold. Damp air clung to his collar and sleeves. He reached across the seat to the cub, still curled on the folded blanket. Its ears were flat against its head, fur stuck in clumps to its bony frame. When he touched its side, there was no response, not even a flick of the tail. He unzipped his jacket. The inside was clammy but dry enough. With both hands, he lifted the cub again, sliding one arm beneath its body, the other behind its narrow shoulders. The animal was feather-light, more bone than muscle, more skin than strength. Its limbs hung slack. He wrapped it tightly inside his coat, pressing it to his chest. The heartbeat was still there, faint, irregular, but present. As long as that beat held, there was something to fight for. The rain hadn't eased. If anything, it is worse now. Thick drops slapped the roof and pooled around the vehicle's tires. Kamari stepped out slowly, careful not to jostle the cub. His boots sank slightly into the softened path, and water traced lines down his face as he moved toward the small utility shelter at the edge of the trees. An old ranger supply point used in off-grid cases like this. Not a clinic, but better than the open road. Inside it was dark and musty, the scent of damp canvas and fuel oil lingering in the corners. A single wooden bench ran along one wall. Kamari crouched and laid the cub on his coat. The animal didn't move. Its eyes remained shut, and for a second he feared the chest had stopped rising. But then, just barely, the ribs lifted. A tiny breath. Then another. He rummaged through the supply crate and found a sealed thermal blanket, unfolding it quickly and wrapping it around the cub's frame. The silver material clung to the soaked fur. He layered another dry cloth beneath it, then lit the portable warmer near its feet. The cub gave no sound, no moan, no twitch. Its mouth was slightly open, gums pale. A thin trail of dirt traced the corner of its nostril. Kamari knelt beside it again, resting his hand near its paw without touching. The heat would take time. Its body was too cold to register comfort right away. If the internal temperature dropped any lower, organs would begin to shut down. And once that began, there would be no bringing it back. He whispered without thinking, "You're not done yet." No response. He pulled his radio from his belt and pressed the call button. Static buzzed for a moment before it cleared. "Rescue base, this is Kamari. Found one. Lion cub. Maybe 5 weeks. Alone. Severe dehydration, hypothermic. Alive. For now. Requesting field med support. Over." The reply crackled through a few seconds later. "Copy, Kamari. Hold position. ETA 35. Kamari clicked once to confirm and set the radio aside. 35 minutes. It felt both short and far. He moved the warmer closer, adjusting the flap of the blanket. The cub's nose twitched faintly. A flicker. The first in nearly 10 minutes. He waited, not speaking again. Outside, the rain didn't stop. It came heavier, turning the road into shallow streams. Wind pressed hard against the side of the shelter, then backed off, like breath exhaled and held. Kamari leaned against the bench and watched the cub's chest rise again. If the next breath followed, there was still a thread to hold. If it didn't, all he'd have left was the sound of rain. And the weight of something that hadn't even begun to live. The road west toward the mobile rescue unit was barely a road at all. More a series of shallow ridges carved by tire tracks over years of passing rangers. In the rain, it turned to clay. Pools filled the lowest dips, and the incline between each bend sent runoff streaming down like veins of rust-colored water. Kamari gripped the wheel with his left hand, knuckles white, while his right arm stayed wrapped around the bundle on his lap. The cub was still wrapped in the thermal blanket, tucked tight against his ribs. Its head rested under his elbow, limp. He couldn't feel its breath anymore, only the weak rhythm of its heart against the inside of his forearm. The vehicle jolted hard as it crossed a narrow culvert, one tire losing traction for half a second. Kamari slowed. Every bump risked shaking the cub's fragile chest, and the blanket didn't stop the vibrations from reaching its tiny frame. He kept the speed just under 20, crawling in stretches where the ground turned soft again. The clock on the dash clicked upward. 17 minutes into the drive. Still 12 more to go. The radio stayed quiet. He didn't speak. Water leaked through a seal in the door and dripped onto the floor near his boot. Outside, the storm hadn't lifted. Trees bowed to the side in the wind. At one point, a flock of guinea fowl darted across the path in a blur of dark feathers, but the cub didn't flinch. It made no sound, no movement, only stayed tucked close as if its body had given up deciding when to respond. Kamari checked the rearview mirror. A habit, not a need. No one would be behind them. Not out here. The camp was remote by design. A mobile station meant for emergency stabilization before transport to the larger rehabilitation center near Talek River. Most rescues didn't need the stop. This one did. The cub would never survive the full 2-hour journey in this condition. He glanced down. The blanket had shifted slightly. He adjusted it gently with 2 fingers, careful not to lift the animal's body. Beneath the thermal layer, the skin felt warmer than before. Not stable, but not as cold. He took that as a sign. A breath, maybe 2 more. That was all he asked from it now. A washboard stretch of road rattled the vehicle for nearly 20 meters. Kamari braced his right arm, absorbing the motion, keeping the cub still. His shoulder burned from the tension. He didn't ease it. The moment he did, the cub could shift, and if its lungs were still struggling, any jolt could be enough to tip them further into crisis. A fever had likely begun already. The body would swing between shivering and stillness, trying to regulate against cold without energy to do it. If the fever pushed too far, if it crossed into sepsis, if dehydration took over, even the camp's team wouldn't be able to reverse it. The next few minutes were critical. If they made it before full collapse, there was a real chance. If not, Kamari would watch it die on his lap. The final slope appeared through the trees. At the crest, a blue tarp peeked over a small structure, the temporary med tent, erected just a day before. Relief didn't register. Not yet. He took the incline slowly, switching to low gear, the engine groaning. As the vehicle leveled out, he pressed the horn once. 2 figures emerged from the tent with field kits. He rolled down the window with his elbow and spoke low. 5-week cub, severe exposure, hypothermia, still breathing. One of the responders opened the passenger door while Kamari shifted his arm, keeping the cub's body supported. Together, they transferred it to a padded sling. The vet's hands moved quickly, fingers pressing the neck, checking the gums. Still warm, that's good. Kamari stepped back but didn't move far. The blanket fell open slightly. The cub's eyes remained shut. Its mouth opened faintly, then closed. No sound. Inside the tent, heat radiated from a portable lamp. The vet team leaned in, working with quiet speed. Kamari stood outside in the softening rain, watching. The drive had ended, but the real fight had only just begun. The interior of the mobile rescue tent smelled of damp canvas and antiseptic. A portable generator hummed outside, powering a single heating unit in the corner and the soft flicker of battery lights strung along the ceiling seam. The lion cub lay motionless on a canvas treatment mat near the center, its body unwrapped now, fur still damp but warming under steady airflow. A medic adjusted the thermal lamp above it, while the lead vet, Dr. Sarah, knelt at its side with a stethoscope pressed beneath the left shoulder blade. Lung crackle. The left side's worse. Possibly early-stage pneumonia, she said quietly without lifting her eyes. The assistant nodded, already preparing a subcutaneous fluid line. A second pack was warmed by the heat source. Kamari remained just outside the entrance flap, watching without speaking. His coat still hung wet around his shoulders. Mud streaked one side of his trousers from the earlier drive. His boots left prints across the dry tarp, but no one looked down. Every eye in the tent was on the cub. Its breathing was shallow, not quick, but thin, as if each inhale took effort. The ribs pulled inward too sharply with every rise. Sarah tapped the edge of the cub's muzzle gently with a gauze-wrapped finger. Still conscious. just too weak to respond. The assistant placed the fluid needle along the loose skin behind the cub's shoulder, threading it in with slow precision. The bag was lifted on a short metal stand. Clear saline and glucose began to drip, steady but slow. The cub's skin twitched once, a faint reaction, then stillness again. "Heart's erratic," Sarah said, placing her fingers gently against the ribcage. "But it's still working." Kamari stepped forward now, silent until he reached the table. He looked down. The cub's eyes remained closed, but its chest still moved. A shallow rise, then a pause, then another. Between each breath, a long silence stretched, sometimes too long. Then another breath came, then another, but no rhythm, no certainty. "If that fluid starts taking hold in the next 20 minutes, we'll have something to build on," Sarah said. "If not—" She didn't finish the sentence. Kamari nodded once. The risk didn't need repeating. The cub was on the line now, not quite dying but not stable enough to survive without intervention. Every organ was under pressure. The lungs could flood. The kidneys could fail. The immune system was compromised, meaning any infection could overwhelm it in hours. If the fever spiked further, it would push the body past the edge. The cub shifted slightly. Not a full movement, just one foreleg twitching, then pulling inward by an inch. Its jaw tightened. One wheeze, higher pitched than before, pushed out between cracked lips. Kamari's hand moved instinctively, resting gently against the cub's hind leg, his palm open and still. He didn't speak. The assistant adjusted the drip rate. A second vet placed a damp cloth against the cub's head, cooling the skin. Its ears flicked once, a soft reflex. Sarah continued working, checking pulse points, adjusting breath angles, listening for changes. The team didn't rush, but their movements carried quiet urgency, the kind shaped by too many close cases, too many small bodies that slipped away without sound. Kamari stepped back again, giving space. His hands were cold despite the heat. He folded his arms and stood near the wall, eyes never leaving the cub. 10 minutes passed. The breathing pattern changed, not dramatically but visibly. Each inhale seemed slightly longer, each pause slightly shorter. The vet didn't speak, neither did Kamari. But the change was noted. The lungs were still at risk, but there was a shift. 1 degree warmer, 1 beat steadier. The hours ahead would carry the weight of every choice made now. The exact fluid balance, the slow warming, the pace of care. No mistakes could be afforded. If the line clotted, the heart failed, or fever surged again, it would be over. But for the moment, just the moment, the cub took another breath. Then another. And the space between them no longer felt like the end. Dawn arrived without color. The sky above the Mar lowlands stayed pale and overcast, a soft haze spreading across the treetops. The storm had passed, but the ground remained wet, and the scent of wet dust lingered across the clearing. Inside the rescue tent, the light changed slowly, from the yellow of battery bulbs to the dim gray of morning. The lion cub stirred. Its chest rose with greater rhythm now, breath no longer scraping through its throat. The fever had broken sometime before midnight. The fluids had held. There was no dramatic change, no sharp turn toward health. But the curve had bent just enough. Enough for a body to begin again, if gently. Kamari hadn't left. He'd taken the cot near the supply wall, where his coat had dried overnight on a folded crate. He was asleep when the cub moved again, head shifting slightly, forelegs stretching outward before pulling back in. One paw, the left, reached out, claws half exposed, trembling from weakness. The blanket had slipped during the night. Part of the cub's belly touched the cool fabric of the mat. It winced faintly but didn't retreat. Instead, the same paw lifted once more, slowly and unsure, reaching toward the corner of the tent where Kamari's coat lay slouched near the cot. No one spoke. No one watched. But the moment unfolded quietly. The paw touched the coat. Then, slowly, the cub rested its head on top of it. The chin pressed into the worn fabric. The weight of the gesture was barely there, less than a sigh, but it stayed. The cub blinked once, a long, deliberate motion, then closed its eyes again, not in collapse, but in rest. Kamari stirred. He didn't rise at first. His hand reached over the side of the cot, fingers curling toward the coat, stopping short when he saw the cub. It hadn't moved again, but the paw remained against the fabric, and the head stayed nestled into the collar fold. A sound came next, not a cry. Not the distressed wheeze from before. Softer, rough, but intentional. A low, single-note moan, thin, breathy, and short-lived, a call without demand, without fear. Kamari didn't speak. He watched. The vets arrived minutes later, boots silent on the ground tarp. Sarah paused when she saw the position. Her expression didn't shift. She only knelt nearby and checked the cub's flank, then gently adjusted the IV still taped along the shoulder. "Still responsive," she whispered. "Hydration holding?" Kamari nodded, but didn't move closer. The moment didn't call for more. The cub's tail flicked once. For the first time since it had been pulled from the roadside trench, its body had taken a position not of collapse, but of choice. Weak as it still was, every muscle remained in rest, not tension. The body language had changed, not to health, but to trust. There would still be risks. Infection hadn't been ruled out. Pneumonia could develop again. The next 2 days would bring new thresholds to cross. But something had shifted beneath the surface, not only in vitals, in intent. Later that morning, as the sun finally broke through cloud cover and touched the wet grass beyond the clearing, Kamari returned to the cot and crouched beside the coat. The cub lifted its head slightly, not startled, just alert. The eyes opened, slow, amber, unfocused, but not afraid. He spoke once. "Still here." The cub blinked again, then lowered its head. That was all. No leap, no climb, no grand recovery. But it had chosen to reach, to rest its weight, what little of it remained, against something it remembered. A texture, a scent, a shape that hadn't left. And in that act, between sleep and pain, it had called out in the only way it knew. Not for rescue, but for presence. The 5th morning after the rescue broke with clearer skies. Wind moved low through the valley, brushing tall grass and shaking loose the last of the storm-heavy leaves. The cub, though still thin and sleeping often, had begun lifting its head when approached. It no longer needed the heat lamp at night. It could sit upright if only briefly, and would sometimes track motion with its eyes. The danger wasn't gone, but it had receded, enough that questions could return. At 9:10 a.m., the report came in from one of the northern perimeter rangers. Unusual circling behavior near the roadside ditch. Not hunting, not patrolling. Just movement, a large lioness looping the same spot again and again, pausing at the very place Kamari had found the cub in the rain. The rescue team gathered quickly. Sarah pulled up the drone logs from earlier that week. No lions had been tracked in that immediate zone for 4 days, but that didn't mean the pride hadn't returned. They were good at staying hidden when they chose. "Describe the pattern," she asked the ranger over comms. "Slow pace, not looking for prey. Sniffing near the trench, then facing outward. She's not moving on." Kamari was already checking the sling harness. No decision like this came lightly. Reuniting a cub after this long meant balancing instinct against biology. If the lioness was the mother, she might still accept the cub, might even have been looking for it. But if not, if she had given it up, or worse, didn't recognize it anymore, then bringing the cub near her would end in death. One misread, one wrong scent, and the cub would be seen as foreign. Still, the behavior was specific, and the location is exact. Sarah nodded slowly. We prepare, quietly, controlled release, only if conditions stay right. The mobile unit packed quickly. No sedation. The cub was alert now, and they wanted its reactions to be natural. Kamari cradled it in a modified chest carrier lined with the coat it had chosen earlier that week. As they rode back out along the same water-rutted road, Kamari glanced at the cub. Its ears shifted occasionally, catching small sounds. Once, when the wind changed, it lifted its nose slightly. The same ditch appeared through the trees. Less flooded now. The grass had returned around it, damp and bent. Kamari stepped out first. The cub stirred in the carrier but didn't struggle. Behind them, the team positioned out of sight. No sudden movements. No sounds. Just waiting. The lioness was already there. She stood maybe 20 meters away, near the shallow bend in the trench. Her fur was darker along the back, streaked with mud, her body taut but still. She hadn't seen them yet. Her head was low, close to the ground, sniffing, pausing, turning once, then returning to the same point. Kamari didn't approach further. He only lowered to one knee and unlatched the carrier slowly. The cub slid slightly forward, front paws touching earth. Its legs shook as it shifted weight. Still weak, but I'm awake, present. The lioness lifted her head, her eyes locked on the movement, and she froze. Ears forward, tail low. Not aggressive, not yet, but fixed in place. The cub didn't run, it didn't make a sound. It only stepped out fully, legs wobbling, and looked in her direction. They stayed like that. Two still forms across a strip of grass and memory. If the lioness turned away now, the test would end. If she charged, the team would intervene. If she paused too long, the cub might collapse. Every second felt slow. But then something shifted. The lioness took one step forward, then another. Slowly, deliberately, she lowered her head and sniffed the ground. Not in warning, but in recognition. Her tail moved once. Kamari did not breathe. They had no confirmation yet, no certainty. But the next hour would decide something greater than survival. It would decide whether this cub had been lost for good, or whether something in the wild had waited for it to come back. Rain came again 5 days later, softer this time, but steady. It arrived early in the afternoon, darkening the grasslands and turning the earth supple underfoot. The mobile team had been watching the lioness since her appearance near the trench. She hadn't left the area. Each morning, she returned. Each evening, she disappeared into the brush. No cubs were with her. No pride followed. She circled the same bend in the drainage path, stopping often to lower her head, pressing her nose to the ground before turning back the way she came. Every movement was deliberate, as if retracing something. By now, the cub could stand on its own and walk short distances. Its breath had steadied. It responded to sound, to light, to warmth. It had begun eating in small portions. The bones beneath its skin were still visible, but the spark of movement had returned to its limbs. When a soft breeze passed through the tent, the cub would lift its head toward it and sniff. No call came from its throat. Just breathe. But it was enough to know it was still searching. The team prepared the second reintroduction. It had to be done carefully. The location would be the same as before, the roadside trench where both had been seen. But the release would be different. This time, they would step back. The cub was carried in a vented crate, lined with the same coat it had chosen days before. Kamari rode beside it, silent during the drive. He checked the latch twice, not because he expected it to fail, but because it mattered that everything went right. The rain was falling lightly when they arrived. Mist curled through the lower branches, and the grass swayed in damp arcs with each gust. Kamari set the crate near the original spot and waited. The lioness had not yet appeared. They waited 40 minutes. No movement came from the bush. No growl. No paw prints. just the quiet rain tapping against the crate's top panel. The cub stayed crouched, watching through the vent slits. Its tail didn't move, but it hadn't curled into the corner either. It was waiting. Kamari stepped back slowly, moving to the line marked out by the rest of the team. 30 meters. No sound. Just stillness. Then, a low rustle. A shape in the green. A large figure emerged through the shrubs, nearly silent. The lioness. Her head was low, ears pricked. She stepped out with care, paws sinking softly into the wet ground. She paused once, lifted her nose, and looked toward the crate. The cub made no noise. The lioness took 2 more steps, closing the distance. Her eyes flicked from the crate to the path, then back again. She circled wide, never running, never showing her teeth. Her body was taut, but not aggressive. Kamari slowly unlatched the crate door from a distance using the attached cord. The panel eased open with a quiet click. The cub hesitated. Then, with weak but certain steps, it emerged. Its legs shook, its belly low to the ground, but it didn't retreat. It moved a few steps toward her, then stopped. The lioness inhaled sharply, chest rising. Her mouth opened slightly and a low, guttural sound escaped. Deep, one note, not a roar, not a warning, a call. Familiar, short and low. The cub looked up. It didn't cry. It didn't run. It took 1 more step, then another. The lioness didn't move. She waited. The rain continued to fall, collecting on her coat and dripping from her whiskers. The cub, soaked again, moved forward until its head nearly touched her leg, then stopped and stood still. The lioness lowered her head. Not fast, not in dominance, just enough for their noses to meet. Kamari felt the breath leave his chest. The team didn't speak. This was the test, the only one that mattered. And under the soft return of rain, a decision was made, not by humans, but by something older, something wordless, something that had waited in silence, and then, finally, answered. The rain lightened just after the moment of touch. It didn't stop entirely, but shifted, from a steady sheet to a fine mist that hung in the air like breath. The lioness and the cub stood motionless for several minutes. Her muzzle remained close to his shoulder, her eyes low but alert. She leaned forward slightly and inhaled again, drawing in his scent, confirming it. Then, gently, she turned her head and brushed it along his side once, from shoulder to flank. The cub trembled. Not in fear, but from exhaustion, from the lingering cold, from the still healing body. Yet it stood. Its legs did not buckle. It stepped forward, closing the final space between them, and nuzzled against her front leg. The gesture was slow. A lean, a pause, and then stillness. The lioness responded not with sound, but with motion. She turned slowly and began to walk toward the tall grass on the other side of the path. Her pace was calm, no rush, no uncertainty, just forward. The cub did not follow immediately. It looked up first, as if checking for permission, as if something in its memory still held the shape of waiting, of watching. It took 1 step, then stopped again. Behind it, the crate still sat open, and beyond that, the man in the brown coat, standing silent in the rain. Kamari hadn't moved since the crate was opened. His hands stayed by his sides, his body still. The coat darkened with moisture again, lines of water cutting through the folds. He made no sound. He didn't need to. The cub looked at him. A full glance, long enough to hold. Not dramatic, not theatrical, just real. Then it turned back toward the grass and followed. The lioness paused once near the edge of the thicket, waiting without turning her head. The cub closed the distance in short steps, legs still uncertain but determined. When it reached her side, she continued. Together, they vanished into the tall grass. The green closed behind them with a soft, wet shiver. No roar followed, no sound at all. The bush swallowed them whole. Kamari stayed where he was, eyes fixed on the place where they had disappeared. The team behind him remained silent. No one moved for several more seconds. The only sound was the rain shifting through the leaves and the slow return of insect calls in the trees beyond. He stepped forward and picked up the empty crate. The blanket was damp again. One small clump of fur remained in the corner, pale, shedding, barely enough to pinch between fingers. He folded the cloth and placed it inside, then closed the latch. No words were spoken as the team packed up. No need for them. What had been done had been done. What was lost had been returned, not by effort alone, but by timing, instinct, and the simple act of waiting until nature chose to respond. Back in the vehicle, Kamari sat in the passenger seat, the crate resting between his boots. The rain on the windshield softened to scattered droplets. The sun was beginning to rise behind the clouds, faint and shapeless, casting no shadows but giving the sky a quiet light. In the distance, grass moved again. Not from wind, but from something passing through. They didn't stop to confirm. They didn't follow. Whatever bond had remained was now where it belonged. A young life had gone as far as human hands could take it, and from there, the wild took over. At the edge of the grassland, just before the trail dipped into the trees, Kamari looked once over his shoulder. The path behind was empty, but somewhere within it, a cub walked behind its mother. And for a single moment it had looked back, not to stay, not to mourn, but simply to remember.